I would now like to introduce Professor Pandit. Professor is one of our professors working in the Leeds Institute of Rheumatic and Musculoskeletal Medicine at the University of Leeds. He previously worked in Oxford and is particularly interested in hip and knee replacements. He has published more than 250 scientific articles and book chapters, and he also holds the title Professor of Orthopaedic Surgery at the University of Oxford, according to his website. He is also has many other roles within the university and within the trust, and has an amazing track record for collaborative work with industry, which is why we wanted to talk to us today about industry partnerships, why it's important and how to do it. And I will now mute myself and pass over to Professor Pandit to start his talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Carol, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Hemant, yes.
Yeah, excellent. So, good evening. And thank you, Sarah and Carol, for your kind introduction and arranging this. I'm quite excited to give this presentation. So the title is self-explanatory. Industry partnerships. Why are they important and how to do it? We all know that research is crucial. It saves lives, improves outcomes, saves money, and is probably one of the most important central pillars of our NHS. Therefore, translational research is the key because it allows us to introduce it into the routine clinical practice. However, many of us are aware that it takes awfully long time for this transition to occur. And therefore, whether we are trying to do research on any new technique, technology, or a patient pathway, it needs a lot of investment from various sources over a sustained period of time. In addition, during this period, the rules and regulations change. And this means that we need to keep track of what's going on. Let me give you a few scenarios. One of the key changing landscapes is Brexit. This has meant that the rules and regulations, for example, regarding CE marking have changed. Now, the equivalence is not acceptable and the new regulations still may not mean much when we leave the EU. In addition to that, the market needs are changing. Some of you might be aware of the term GERFT. It stands for Get It Right First Time. The whole emphasis on this one is to provide the right treatment to the right patient at the right time, and it should be at the first time. This has huge implications for NHS because it decides what should be the financial burden or financial incentive the NHS Institute would get. In addition, there is the data which is collected by National Joint Registry, and at times there could be field safety notices which are put forward by MHRA and other notified bodies. It would be funny if I don't mention COVID in today's world. We know that COVID has had a significant impact and continues to have a huge problem for the NHS as well as in our day-to-day life. It has reduced the demands for elective surgery because we can't provide them, and we are building our waiting list. In addition to that, there is a huge pressure on us to save money. It's difficult to do face-to-face patient assessments, in fact impossible, and most of our clinics are over telephone as well as the follow-ups. And last but not the least, in spite of what many people say, COVID has had a huge impact on the funding that you can generate for non-COVID research. I thought if I give you between 4 to 6 examples of how I have worked with industry of different nature, and then try and give you a summary of what I think is crucial one needs to think about when one works with industry it might give you a decent overview. So about 6 years ago, I became aware that there is a drug called liposomal bupivacaine, also known as Exparel, which is a long-acting local anesthetic, and it has been regularly used for last 10 years in different types of surgery, with my interest being knee replacement, used extensively in knee replacement. It has been shown to reduce the length of stay, improve patient outcomes by reducing pain, etc. However, there was no independent study at that time and no non-industry study. Another interesting feature was there was no study conducted outside US. Clearly, the company called Pakira or Pasira was keen to explore new markets. At the same time, they were aware that it would cost them a significant amount of money. You're looking at in terms of 2 million plus if they wanted to do this study. So I proposed a study which could be conducted through NIHR. I initially applied to HTA. I was unsuccessful, but I got really good encouraging feedback. And one of the feedbacks was that I needed to show that there was active engagement from the industry. So when I applied to RFPB, I had a clear memorandum of understanding from Pakira that they will provide the drug for free, which was not a small amount of money. For a sample size of 500 plus, that means they had to give 280 odd drug vials, allowing for spillage. It would have cost them $300 per ampule. So it was not a small amount of money. So that helped me secure the grant. As happens in many studies, there were some issues with the drug being delivered to us because it had to be imported from US without breaking the cold chain. And this was a CTIMP study, that is a controlled trial for investigational medical product. And therefore, our recruitment got delayed by almost 6 to 8 months. It meant that the RFPB funding was not able to cover the entire study. And then I went back to the company, where the company was able to provide additional funds and no cost extension was provided by NIHR. So it shows that there is really not a major issue so far. You are transparent about the way you are going to conduct the study, and you involve all the involved parties right from the word go. Another example, we applied to versus arthritis probably 4 years ago when I joined Leeds. This was to develop an instrumented sensory module for arthroplasty treatment, also known as iSmart. This is a new technology to assess the patients remotely. We wanted to use it in knee replacements. It has a worldwide potential because it's commonly performed procedure. There is a huge patient buy-in because patients can see their own data. They participate actively in the recovery phase, and they can provide feedback to themselves as well as to the healthcare professionals. However, we were at a very low level of technology readiness level. If you see on the right, these are the readiness levels from 1 to 9, and I would say that we were probably at level 2. At that, and we also realized that we will need support in getting further approvals if we want to introduce this technique in clinical practice. So this is how the device will look. So if you see at the bottom right, there is the polyethylene, and in that there is a cavity in the center, and then in that polyethylene cavity we would insert a capsule which would have sensors inside. So this is at very preliminary stage. But to get the funding from versus arthritis, we needed a memorandum of understanding with a company. We needed also technical support from them to do various in vitro testing. So they provided us the CAD models of the implant. They also provided us the engineering and regulatory input. For example, where you can put the device and where, more importantly, you can't put the device. They provided us the raw material, and also we have access to their testing facility. So they haven't given any cash, but there is a lot of support which is crucial for success of this study. At the same time, there are questions when we move forward with this study. Who will hold the IP? Whether we will be able to publish our work, because if you publish it, then it becomes very much in public domain. Third study I wanted to mention is a NIHR HTA study. What I'm trying to get across here is that here I have been able to build bridges with industry, and I have been able to get funding from the funding bodies as well as from industry, either in cash or in kind. So this is quite an exciting study. This was a NIHR initiated call where they wanted us to explore other treatments for patients with knee arthritis. At this juncture, anyone with end-stage arthritis gets a knee replacement of some sort. Because it's an artificial joint, it has its own problems and it fails with time. You might be surprised to hear that if a patient gets a knee replacement at the age of 55 or under, the chances of him or her needing a revision knee replacement are at least 7 times higher than if he or her would have got that knee replacement when they were 70 years or older. Therefore, there is a clear unmet need to treat patients who are young and active with an alternative treatment, knee distraction being one of them. Typically, in Leeds or in many places in our country, the knee distraction is done by a complex contraption called Elizara frame, which are circular frames. And these are quite cumbersome. They are difficult for the patient to manage with, because it will be difficult. You can imagine the knee is straight, it is fixed. The patient will find it difficult to wear clothes, etc. There is a CE mark device which is manufactured in Netherlands, because most of the work on knee distraction was done in Netherlands for last 10 years. It's lighter, less cumbersome, it is less bulky, and therefore more patient friendly. So when the CARTS study was approved, first and foremost, we made sure that NIHR agreed that this is a technique study and not a device study. At the same time, it was clear that the device that I showed you in the last slide, the tubular fixator rather than the ring fixator, was only available in Netherlands. And the studies that they had published on were small sample sizes. The industry needed the data. At the same time, we wanted to have the device. So we got almost a 70% reduction in the cost of the device so that we could use it. At the same time, we could conduct other sub-studies to establish whether indeed the tubular fixator is better or as good or as bad as the ring fixator. Obviously, the industry is aware that we cannot share the data with them except update on any adverse events. With the negotiations regarding how they will provide the device, how many we will need, and what will happen with reimbursement after the study finishes if the device gets introduced into day-to-day clinical practice is still going on. There are various ways one can engage with industry. This is another mechanism. About 2 years ago, Glaxosmithkline approached me. They wanted to introduce double concentration, so high concentration Voltarol gel. It's a steady state phase 1 pharmacokinetic study. And this was there for industry sponsored and industry led. They provided all the support that was needed to conduct this study. Provided the drug, the placebo, the people to apply the drug, because it was quite a rigidly controlled study. Provided the money, provided help with data analysis as well as write-up of the paper. And our key contribution was the patients, clinical expertise, and the clinical data. And what we were really interested in is timely execution of the study. So basically, here my aim was quite simple: to raise adequate funds for my research group with the flexibility that it would provide for me to spend the money as appropriate on other research projects and also get a 3-star publication. Last but not the least, periprosthetic fractures. And I will try and put all these examples again into key messages. About 10 years ago, currently now one of my colleagues, but previously my NJR fellow, with him we published a paper where we showed that the risk of periprosthetic fractures, you can see the X-ray, you can see the metal stem, and below that there is a fracture. This fracture after around a total hip replacement is an increasing problem. We call it a silent epidemic. And what we showed is that the risk of fracture depends upon multiple factors: patient, surgeon, and probably the key one, the implant factors as well. When I joined Leeds, one of my PhD students, who is now finished the PhD and he's defending it by end of this month, 3 years ago approached me, Josh Lamb. Many of you might know him. Very, very bright chap. He was quite interested in looking at periprosthetic fractures, mainly over cementless stems rather than cemented, which is this particular design where we had done our original work. So he approached National Joint Registry. We were able to get big data set, and over the last 3 years, he has really done well. We have published in many 3-star publications and established ourselves in this field. So we are considered now a national expert. As luck would have it, it was in fact this particular stem was identified as an outlier by National Joint Registry after we started doing our research. And MHRA approached that company which manufactures this implant and explained to them that they need a reliable partner to understand why these fractures occur with that particular stem and what are the ways one can reduce the risk of fracture. So it gave us an opportunity to work as an advisor for the MHRA and also work with the industry to ensure that patient safety is not hampered. So the industry supported us for biomechanical testing. They also gave us access to clinical data from other institutes which use this stem because we don't use it here in Leeds. And it helped us build, and we continue to build, new partnerships with other academic institutes as well as other industry partners who realize that there are certain key design features which we can examine as well as understand their impact on day-to-day clinical practice. One other mechanism to engage with industry and also grant body is knowledge transfer partnership. KTP allows a UK registered business or a not-for-profit organization to partner with UK higher education or further education institution as well as Research Technology Association. The business partner contributes typically 1/3 of the money, 2/3 of the money comes from government. It is run through Innovate UK, and the knowledge-based partner works closely with the business partner. Typically, you can raise up to about £75,000 per year for 2 to 3 years. So you can easily support a PhD student for that. Their success rate is about 70%. And currently we have in the process of, we have just submitted a project with another industry partner who wanted to develop, who are developing, in fact, they have developed the prototype, but they haven't put it first in human studies, still not started. So they wanted to do metal-free knee replacement. For that, they wanted to develop a new patient-reported outcome measure. To reduce the risk from each party concerned, Invibio approached the KTP, and their agent who is based in Nexus, and we have applied for the fund. Another area you are aware is the NIHR Medtech and in vitro cooperatives, the short form being MICs. In Leeds, we have two MICs. We have the in vitro diagnostics cooperative as well as the surgical medtech cooperative. And the trust and university both collaborate quite well with both these MICs. Typically, the small and medium enterprises will approach these MICs and they will ask for advice and academic partners. Many a times these MICs, along with support from Nexus and other organizations, will be able to support the seed-corn projects, and this is a smart way to get small pots of funding. They will help you support identifying as well as developing new partnerships. There is a business development and an innovation manager based in the trust. There is a program director of the MIC, and they will facilitate and they will bring new industry partners for discussions with you. Clearly, it is a mutually beneficial relationship. At the same time, I must warn you that it is quite time consuming. I probably end up having meetings over 10 to 12 meetings, each lasting for an hour, and one out of those 10 to 12 meetings might be fruitful. Another area is academic health science network. There are currently 15 AHSNs across the country, and they act as a trusted intermediary between the NHS, the academia, and the industry. They are primarily dedicated to improving population health, facilitating transformational patient safety, and supporting economic growth. They are able to bridge the gap by having various roundtable events where the teams with and they also have a team with expertise on all the relevant aspects, right from financial side up to IP, as well as how to make sure that the new technique or technology can be adopted in the clinical practice. We talk about funding options for us researchers. Broadly speaking, I would say that either the funding comes from industry or from funding bodies like NIHR. And when you look at it, clearly the industrial funding is probably, you can get it with relative ease. Funding bodies gives you more prestige, kudos. And therefore there might be questions about bias versus credibility. At the same time, the industry funding will give you more flexibility. Funding bodies typically tend to give you higher amount of funding. The industry funding is output driven. Funding bodies typically are process driven. Industry tends to give you more money which you can use for other purposes, provided you are able to manage the output in a timely fashion. While the funding bodies mainly give you funding which is for your staff or for infrastructure funding. However, this is not entirely true. Typically, I would say that the industry funding tends to be short to medium term and funding bodies tend to be medium to long term, but it will of course depend upon the nature of funding you are going for. As a researcher, I always try to maintain a good balance because I have to maintain my staff, I have to pay their salaries. At the same time, I need some flexibility in the money that can be raised. So typically, I would have a 50-50 balance in my portfolio. One also has to remember, what is the industry looking for? Industry, of course, wants to make money. Therefore, they want return on their investment in a timely fashion. They want an increase in the market share, and also they want to get new market. They want to extend the indications of use of their particular device or technique or technology. And to tell you the truth, increasing the unit price is almost never an option. Year on year, the implant prices are coming down, they are not going up. But what they also need is the clinical data. And therefore, they want to be associated with reputed partners. That means those who have a good name, who have high volume, and who are influential. They want to have a cost-effective partnership. They do not want too much red tape. They clearly want unbiased research and publications which are independent of the industry. They also want to know where the research is based, because clearly local research is crucial. So a research could have very well been carried out in US, as I showed you about the Exparel drug, but for them to have introduction into the UK market, they want to conduct the research in UK or at least in Europe. Therefore, from our perspective, what are the key points we should remember? You have either a private or a public enterprise. You have to you have to be very careful about data sharing. Again, you have to think about the intellectual property, not only the foreground IP, but the background IP. You have to be very transparent. You have to acknowledge the industry support in your publications. You have to also see whether the industry wants it a researcher-led project or an industry-initiated project. And please make sure that you get adequate funding for the entire study period. There have been many examples where you end up having a general corridor or a conversation in one of the conferences, and the industry partner will say, well, can you do this study? And you almost end up underselling yourself. Before you commit to any project, make sure that you liaise with your finance team, with your contracts team, IP team, and with the university or with the trust. So if you want to introduce any new technique or device in the NHS Trust, at least in Leeds, we have something called as NIPS form. It's quite a convoluted process, but it is important because it is primarily for patient safety. So it's new intervention for patient safety. Last but not the least, you have to remember that the views are changing. So I'll give you one example. About 18 months ago, the government came up with something called as SIF, which is Strength in Placement Funding. The basis behind that was that there are different areas in the UK who are strong in different aspects of healthcare technology. For example, in Yorkshire, we have a lot of SMEs. And therefore, the government said that there should be shared funding. So if you want to apply for 5 million, government will give you 2.5 million primarily towards infrastructure, while the industry will provide you 2.5 million towards the output and particular studies. That has therefore shared risks as well as shared rewards. And then you have to navigate between the trust, the university, as well as the industry. Also, how you deal with a small or medium scale enterprise as against a large industry is quite different. Sometimes the SMEs may not survive, so you need to be careful with whom you are dealing with. Also, the type of study is crucial, whether it's a investigational medical product, so CTIM study, or a non-CTIM study. CTIM study are quite rigorous, particularly when it comes to drug delivery, etc. Another thing is, nowadays there is a lot of encouragement for spin-off companies. So I referred to Nexus before. The whole Nexus building was developed with support from industry. And there are many SMEs which are based in Nexus. And they enable the businesses from different sectors to connect with the expertise, talent, and facilities that our university can provide. It's a very difficult question for me to answer. What does the future hold? It's almost impossible. But I do think that with time, at least in surgical field, the randomized controlled trials will become less popular because they are costly, they're time consuming. They don't necessarily mimic complex real life scenarios. Most of our patients now are polypharmacy. And therefore, and another aspect to remember that any surgical trial, the expertise of the surgeon is a major confounder to overcome. Industry clearly needs evidence on their existing products as well as the future products. It is quite possible that the NIHR structure as well as its funding mechanism may change. The discussions are going on as we speak, and next 6 weeks you can expect a major announcement. Shared funding is likely to be the norm rather than an exception. Shared means shared with industry. From COVID, various lessons have been learned and we continue to learn them. For example, remote access to the patient as well as data entry being provided, and not necessarily rigid trial design, but platform trials. This has become quite common now with COVID, where each patient can have multiple different recruitments for different interventions, and then they can decipher whether which particular medication is working. Clearly, there needs to be more transparency with how the drug and technology can be adopted into routine clinical practice, and there has to be less red tape. So to summarize, the key messages for you are these 4 C's. Don't be afraid of collaboration. I think communication is the key, and use the social media. Probably once a week, we get feedback on our papers that we publish through Twitter account, and people will approach us to say, do you want to work with us on this particular project? You must have a strong core team, and the team should have complementary skills. Try and develop a niche area. I would say definitely one of the key areas for our group is periprosthetic fractures. Of course, you have to be patient. It does take time to be recognized, and then with various industry partners approaching you. Keep publishing, and do not think that you should work in silo. Do not worry about your idea being stolen. I think that is really very rarely it happens. I've always found a lot of benefit from collaborating and communicating. This is just one probably view that I have presented to you all. I'm more than happy to take questions. And I think the last slide is about the next presentation that Carol and Sarah have arranged. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I've got a couple of questions that have come through on the chat. Just starting with the first question. Professor Pandit, what would you recommend to somebody whose employer is the NHS, is an NHS Trust rather than university? What route should they go down if they're interested in starting conversations with an industrial partner?
So thank you for that question. I don't know where this colleague is based. I guess here in Leeds. So in Leeds, we have a very robust research and innovation services which are based in Jimmy's. So every trust now realizes that research and innovation is a key for their success. Not only they get better recognition, but they also are able to raise funds. So if you are based in Leeds, I would say you need to approach RIS, find out. So basically, the contract you will hold with the industry partner will be through RIS. And in fact, now there is when Jackie Andrews was in charge of RIS, she changed certain rules so that all industry supported studies, the primary sponsor was trust anyway, rather than the university. So that would be the first port of call, according to me. Chris Herbert is the person, and Chris Twelves is the interim director of RIS at present. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was very helpful. Got another question. What about intellectual property? How do you resolve issues with intellectual property as to who holds what the company holds and what the academic partner holds? Absolutely.
Now, it's a very complex issue, and I by no means am an expert in this field. There are lawyers and there are teams based in the university, in the Worsley building, and my advice would be to approach them sooner rather than later before you come to any agreement about sharing any data. Typically, any industrial partner would ask you to sign a non-disclosure agreement before you get into any discussions. And similarly, you should have your own non-disclosure agreement with the industry. Those agreements, there are standard formats, and you can get them from the IP colleagues in the university. Once you have established that, then you can have frank discussions with industry. As I said before, the IP could be background or foreground. The background IP, which you already know and your own knowledge stays with you. The foreground IP is a complex discussion, and usually the university has a mechanism of splitting the IP three ways. University, yourself, if you are employed by university, I guess, and the industry. And one needs to be really careful about it. And that's where you also, as I mentioned, you need to be careful whether you can publish, because you need to file for a patent. Filing for a patent is can be cumbersome, can be costly, and many a times it doesn't lead to any significant money making for industry. Therefore, you do need industry support, but if you ask me, single advice would be talk to university lawyers sooner rather than later.
Thank you, that's very good. And we have another question about publication. What happens if the industrial partner is not keen on you publishing your results because it's not what they wanted?
Yeah, so that's an important question, and there is no easy answer to that. It depends upon what stage of your research you are, what stage of your research you're looking at. So I may give you the example of iSmart device. I would be very careful in publishing the iSmart details of iSmart device, because I would like first it to be patented before we publish on it. As against that, if the exparel drug, which is already available freely in US, the industry would encourage me to publish my results. At the same time, I'm very clear when I negotiate with industry. I always say the rules, I set down the rules quite early. So in any NIHR or whenever there is a shared funding with a grant body, the industry really does not get access to the raw data. They do not decide what I can publish, because sometimes the results can be not something they want to hear. So I will always keep that very clear in the discussions to start with, and that can have implications. If the industry does not want you to publish the results, either it could be because they want to protect the IP or because the results are not helpful to their cause. I think if it is the first one, that means clearly it's in the developmental stage, and you should work with the industry because their aim is to get it patented, and that will help you as well. But if it's the latter, then you should have had those discussions very early to say that they can't hold you at ransom, to say you can't publish a paper till they give you freedom. So many times I end up having discussions where the industry will say, we will like to see a draft paper from you before you publish it. And I just say, that's not acceptable. I will publish it because you want it to be independent. That's the only way the industry will get kudos. And you have to play hardball at times.
Thank you very much. We've also got an enthusiastic message from someone in a Trust Medical Physics department, wondering what are good routes for them to get involved in industrial partnerships.
I missed some of it, Sarah. What are good?
Oh, a message from Trust Medical Physics department. How people from there can get involved in industrial partnerships.
Oh, I don't know who this message is from, but our medical physics department is really strong. I think the trust needs industry and the industry needs our trust. And therefore, I would say that, again, liaising with Chris Herbert and his group is probably the right way forward. At the same time, if any industry partners are interested in introducing any technique or device in the trust, obviously they have to go through the research and innovation services, and the medical physics has to approve the device for its safety. and that's probably the best way to liaise with industry. If even if you want any particular advice about anything, do drop me a line. I'm sure you can find me on the intranet or internet, and I can, if I can be of any help, very happy to. Thank you.
Brilliant. One last question, unless there are any more. What are your main pieces of advice for somebody that has never done this before? If there were just two things you could tell someone, what would you say to them?
I think the key is not to be worried. So collaboration, as I said in my last slide, collaboration is the key. It's almost impossible to do meaningful research without industry input. Depends upon, of course, the type of research you're doing. And don't be afraid to speak up, and don't undersell yourself.
Thank you very, very much indeed.